Americans, Hugh Hewitt, good morning to you from inside the Beltway. I hold in my hand a book, Trump and the American Future. It is the 41st book by Newt Gingrich, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, prolific author. And as I told him last week when I talked to him for the first time about Trump and the American future, I think it's the most significant thing that Speaker Gingrich has written since the contract with America. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Welcome back to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning. It's great to be with you. It's amazing how many things are going on in America right now.
Oh, my goodness. And a week ago, we talked. It was before the Republican convention. I want to know, before I go to the specifics of Trump and the American future, what did you make of the convention, and do you think the president got a bump?
I think the president clearly got a bump. Almost all the polls show that. In addition, I thought it was brilliantly done having everyday people from so many different ways of life talk about so many different things that it was much less political in the narrow partisan sense than the Democrats, and I think therefore more interesting. And clearly, you'll note, for example, there was a very significant number of African Americans, some of them with very poignant personal stories. And Trump, in fact, has gotten a significant bump in the African American community in terms of his favorability. And I think that's because people suddenly saw a different version of him than they've been given by the political media.
There were two speeches, Mr. Speaker. You've seen a million speeches. Ann Dorn, the widow of the St. Louis former cop who had been murdered, and the Muellers, whose daughter was raped and assaulted by Baghdadi and killed by ISIS. I don't think I'll ever forget those speeches. And if they didn't move people in America, I don't know what will.
Well, I think that was typical of the entire convention. You can find a dozen different personal stories that weren't political, and yet their impact was enormously political. And I think that it was that ability to blend everyday real people. And again, this was a guy who spent 13 years in reality television, and I think he has an instinct for this. And I think the elite media routinely forgets how good he is at it. And I have to say, on a lighter note, Calista and I watched the fireworks, and watching that many fireworks go off above the Washington Monument, that was amazing. That was a very Trumpian moment.
Oh, it was. Whatever the order was for fireworks, I can just see him at the desk striking it out and saying triple that. Now, Mr. Sure. Speaker, let's go to the book. At one point you say it is a survival election. In fact, you say that repeatedly throughout Trump and the American future. Would you explain to people why that's not melodramatic? It's descriptive.
Well, I think you have in Biden and Harris the most radical team ever nominated by a major party. You have in the Biden agreement that he made with Bernie Sanders an even more radical agreement. And you have a party which every day in every major city is proving it doesn't understand evil, it doesn't understand predators, it doesn't understand how to provide safety. And if that party ends up controlling the House, the Senate, and the White House, we end up with a Pelosi, Schumer, Harris, Biden team. We won't be the same country. We will be literally a different country than we have been for the last 250 years.
Now, the former vice president, took that head on yesterday. Cut number one, I want to play for the speaker, Joe Biden, yesterday.
Ask yourself, do I look like a radical socialist with a soft spot for rioters? Really?
Mr. Speaker?
Yeah, my answer is, did you watch the mayor of Portland the other night after 95 days of riots and the killing of a Trump supporter? He looked exactly like Joe Biden. Nice, pleasant, incompetent, soft. I think that the reality is that Joe Biden never spoke once about violence until the polls began to collapse. And suddenly his handler said to him, you got to go out there and say you don't like violence. Otherwise, he still wouldn't have said it. So I don't think, in fact, I thought when we were talking about the fireworks, that in comparison to Trump, you would have had very, very tiny little fireworks if you'd had Joe Biden. Probably the kind you could hold in your hand.
Now, in Trump and the American future, you're also very blunt about the president. And you write the failure of his administration thus far, amid many successes, was the failure to think through how bitter and deep the counterattack would be. And you detail it in great specificity. But do you think we are failing to underestimate how bitter this campaign will be?
No, I think this campaign will be endless. There are already reports that the Bloomberg people, for example, have openly said whatever the results are on election night, as mail ballots come in, they'll be changed. And that no matter how big Trump's margin is on election night, in the end, they'll beat him. I mean, they are so openly describing how they plan to steal the election. We have never seen anything like this outside of maybe Tammany Hall and a few big city machines. But you have a nationwide effort underway. They hate Trump. They hate capitalism. They hate conservatism. They hate right to life. They hate Christians and Jews. I mean, just look at the people who are out there, and watch what Antifa's doing. Look at Kenosha, where 2 days ago the police picked up 3 vehicles from Seattle that literally were filling up containers with gasoline to go and start fires when the police arrested them. We really, I think, are in a war between the forces of civilization and the forces of anarchy and tyranny.
Now,
And
you referred
frankly,
to the very front story on Axios 2 hours ago. Democratic group warns of apparent Trump election day landslide. And this group called Hawkfish and Imagine America says, on election night, you're going to see a red map, but don't worry, over the next 96 hours, that'll change. And
right.
that's never happened in America. Only Florida in 2000. That's the only time that's ever happened. And they're softening us up for that, Mr. Speaker.
Well, why do you think Hillary Clinton said Biden should never concede? Because they know in California, where they really pioneered vote harvesting, which means, for example, in Nevada, the Democratic legislature and the Democratic governor have asked the post office to send out 200,000 ballots. The people that the post office has already told them don't exist. They've moved out of state. They're gone. Those 200,000 ballots are going to sit at apartments. They're going to sit at nursing homes. They're going to sit at a variety of places. And I'm confident the Culinary Union will be glad to have its members vote 5 or 10 times each. And they'll just go around and pick up the ballots.
Well, yeah,
the largest threat of a stolen election in American history.
I tell people I left California in 2016, and in March, 2 ballots were delivered to the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt and I at our old address. And that is going to happen everywhere where mail ballots happen, and ballots have value, and anything that value gets sold. Mr. Speaker, I want to go back to Trump and the American future. Your most optimistic line on page 25 is if President Trump gets reelected, there will be a substantial collapse of resistance in the deep state. Now, you and I disagree on what to call the deep state, but let me call it the permanent government. Why do you think it will collapse? Why wouldn't it just dig in deeper like it always does?
Well, because I think winning twice, particularly if he wins by a significant margin, creates a sense of legitimacy where, the bitter enders, the hardcore people are never going to give up. But normal, everyday people just get worn out. And I think that if Trump proves that he has the staying power to endure 4, almost 5 solid years of news media lies, distortion, and hostility, and he's still standing and the American people side with him, that he'll have the kind of moral authority that we normally grant to presidents.
I hope you're right about that. I want to go to page 79. New York City is undergoing a violence wave, the likes of which we have not seen since the bad old days before Rudy. On page 79, you talk about prosecutors who won't prosecute and about no bail. I think we are reaping what we have sowed, Mr. Speaker, in big cities. I think you finished this book in March, but you predicted New York in September.
Oh, yeah. Look, I think you'll see it right now. If you look at Portland, the sheriffs who have refused to go into Portland to help have all said, look, you have a prosecutor who refuses to keep people locked up. We're not going to risk our sheriff's deputies to go in there, pick them up, and have them back on the street in 3 hours. We are literally re-entering the world of the late 60s, which made Clint Eastwood famous. Because if you go back and look at the original Eastwood films that were so big as successes, they're all about a hard-bitten cop in a world where the lawyers and the judges are all left-wingers, and where criminals are so confident that they think that they can control the city. Ironically, it takes place in San Francisco. So we're right back where we were. I did a podcast recently with Rudy Giuliani and another with Bill Bratton, who'd been his police commissioner. And in both cases, they're looking at New York going back to a pre-1993 crime wave. Everybody knows how to stop it. De Blasio, of course, is crazy, the worst mayor in the country. And they are wrecking our biggest city. The number of people who are moving out is startling. Same thing's happening in San Francisco, where people are just leaving because they're sick of it. They can't stand the violence. They can't stand the human feces on the street. They can't stand a government which is paying for hotel rooms and drugs and alcohol for homeless people. And I think this is a nationwide problem. And I think the president is exactly right to keep saying this is the result of Democratic mayors following policies that are disasters.
Let me talk as well about COVID. The president was attacked by Joe Biden yesterday for COVID response. You write in Trump and the American Future, and you had diagnosed this early on, that bureaucracies were working at their worst in the early days of COVID, the FDA, the CDC. But it doesn't seem as though the American people have been told that story very much, Mr. Speaker. Why do you blame bureaucracies for slow out of the gate starts?
Well, first of all, I did a podcast with Dr. Fauci in early February, and he's a brilliant guy, and I've been working with him since he worked on AIDS in the mid-'80s. And he said then, I don't think this is going to be much worse than SARS. He certainly did not expect a pandemic because the Chinese had lied to everybody. When it was clear by the end of February that it was much worse, we had a 3-week screw-up, if you'll pardon the language, at the Center for Disease Control, which I used to represent in Congress, and they just did the wrong things. And because bureaucracies don't like to give up power, they don't like to admit that there are private sector solutions that are better, faster, et cetera, it took Trump intervening again and again and again, and Vice President Pence intervening again and again, to impose market solutions. The net result was, unlike Italy, where the system almost collapsed, they have been able to provide more ventilators, more intensive care units, more personal protective equipment, and the result was that nobody in America, to the best of my knowledge, no one was refused help because of the lack of equipment. Well, that was a product of the free enterprise system, not the bureaucracy.
So, Mr. Speaker, as we got 4 minutes here, Trump and the American Future was finished in March. Are you an optimist that President Trump will win re-election? Are you an optimist that we can defeat the virus by the development of a vaccine?
Well, I think we can certainly control the virus. And remember, these viral things come every 10 years. I mean, what we need to do once this is over is have a thorough, honest review of how screwed up the system was. And look at things, including, by the way, Governor Cuomo's disastrous decision to put people with infections into nursing homes. And Cuomo's decisions probably killed between 6,000 and 10,000 or 12,000 senior citizens, all of which, of course, he would lay on Trump's desk, even though it was his personal mistake as governor. So I think we need to review everything and recognize that these things are going to occur. They're a natural part of life. And we need to get better, faster, and more effective at responding to them.
Now about the election.
Oh, look, I'm like the guy in upstate New York who has a model based on primary turnout. He said it's been right 25 out of the 27 presidential elections since primaries began in 1912. He predicts Trump will have 376 electoral votes. I decided I would go with him, and I think that you'll see a pickup of 2 in the Senate by the Republicans, and you'll see Kevin McCarthy as Speaker, and you'll be in a new world in mid-November.
All right. Now, my very last question. I believe you invented President Trump's approach to the media in the 2012 presidential campaign. I give you credit for adopting the media as an opponent. He said explicitly he's running against the media. Do you expect the debates to come off, and do you expect the president to go after any moderator who departs from the moderator's job?
Yeah, sure. I mean, he does what Romney should have done in 12 when they had a moderator from CNN who just plain lied.
Candy Crowley.
And if he had turned to her and said, what you just said is not true, it would have changed the whole tenor of the debate. Trump is going to not hold anything back. He never has. I think they will have to have the 3 debates. I don't see any way for Biden to hide. I mean, you can't run for commander-in-chief, which he's doing right now on a pathetic basis. You know, once again yesterday, he took no questions. I think it's late July was the last time he took a question, and the result was so disastrous. They just decided they can't let him out on his own. He's not, you know, he cannot be trusted to be competent if you let him on his own.
Last question. Do you expect the Presidential Debate Commission to give us moderators who are fair?
No, of course not. The Presidential Debate Commission is part of the old establishment.
I don't know how we put up with that, Mr. Speaker. I don't know why we put up with that. I know we have to debate.
I don't either. If I had been the nominee in 12, I wouldn't have. I would have rejected the debate commission and insisted on a totally separate model. These are self-appointed, self-important people who every 4 years get to be at the center of things for no reason. They're not elected. They don't represent any authority except their own arrogance.
It's pretty remarkable. Trump and the American Future is Newt Gingrich, new bestseller. Mr. Speaker, thank you for joining me. Terrific book, terrific read.
As always.
Thank you.
Thanks.